The road to what was once Hoer Verde is not a road at all. It is, honestly, more like a suggestion, a faint scar in the dense Brazilian jungle slowly being reclaimed by nature. You can almost feel the weight of the silence before you even arrive. The air grows heavy, thick with humidity and, well, the ghosts of unspoken stories. Birds seem to sing a little less loudly here. The usual chorus of the rainforest feels muted, as if it's holding its breath. It's a place defined by an absence, a profound and unsettling emptiness that hangs in the air like a permanent fog. It feels like a place that's waiting for something or someone that will never return. We are told that on a particular day in 1923, a group of travelers stumbled upon this place. They were expecting to find a bustling small town of around 600 souls, a place to rest and resupply. They had heard of Hoer Verde, a community carved out of the wilderness, but what they found instead was a ghost town. Not a ruin, but a place seemingly frozen in time. The streets were deserted, yet clean. Doors were left ajar, swinging gently in the breeze. The silence was not peaceful. It was loud, oppressive, and deeply wrong. It was the kind of silence that screams of a sudden, inexplicable departure. They walked through the village, their footsteps echoing unnervingly against the silent buildings. Every home they entered told the same impossible story. It was as if the inhabitants had simply evaporated mid-action. In one house, a rifle lay propped against a wall, recently cleaned, its oil still smelling fresh. In another, a half-eaten meal sat on a dinner table, the food just beginning to show the first signs of decay. The scene was not one of panic or struggle. There were no signs of a fight, no overturned furniture, no ransacked rooms. It was a portrait of ordinary life, abruptly and completely abandoned. What could make 600 people leave everything behind? Not just their homes, but their possessions, their food, their very lives in progress. The travelers found no bodies, they found no graves, they found no notes explaining the exodus save for one chilling message that would come to define the entire mystery. The people of Hoer Verde had not just left, they had vanished from the face of the earth. They walked out of their lives and into a legend, leaving behind only questions and a profound sense of unease that lingers in this place to this very day, a century later. When the first official investigators arrived, days after the initial discovery, the scene had barely changed. They documented their findings with a growing sense of disbelief. These were hardened men, familiar with the strange and often brutal realities of life in the remote interior of Brazil. Yet, nothing could have prepared them for the sheer strangeness of Hoer Verde. They catalogued the contents of the homes with meticulous care, hoping to find a clue, any small detail that might explain the mass disappearance. But every detail only deepened the mystery, painting a picture of a community that had simply ceased to exist in the blink of an eye. The reports from the time read almost like a work of fiction. They described tables set for dinner, with plates of rice and beans left untouched. They mentioned half-smoked pipes resting on windowsills, the ash still delicate and undisturbed. Clothing was found neatly folded in drawers or hanging on lines in backyards, stiff from the sun. In the small general store, goods lined the shelves, and money was still in the cash register. This was not a town that had been looted. It was not a town that had fled from a threat. It was a town that had been interrupted, as if a film had been paused on a single silent frame. One investigator's account, later published in a Rio de Janeiro newspaper, captures the atmosphere perfectly. He wrote of the unbearable hum of nothingness. He described walking into a home and seeing a rocking chair still gently moving, as if its occupant had just stood up. He noted the presence of domestic animals, dogs and chickens, wandering the streets, confused and hungry. The animals had been left behind. This detail was particularly disturbing. People fleeing in a hurry might leave possessions, but to abandon their animals, their loyal companions and livestock suggested something altogether different. The investigators searched the surrounding jungle for miles. They followed every faint trail, explored every cave, and called out into the dense foliage until their voices were raw. They found nothing. No footprints leading away from the village, no makeshift camps, no signs of a mass migration. It was as if a line had been drawn around Verde, and beyond it, the 600 inhabitants had never existed. The official inquiry concluded with no answers, only a collection of unsettling facts that defied any logical explanation, leaving the fate of the villagers to the realm of speculation and fear. Of all the unsettling scenes discovered in the abandoned village of Verde, none was more chilling than the small, one-room schoolhouse. It stood at the edge of the central square, its door slightly ajar, creaking a mournful rhythm in the wind. Inside, the air was stale and thick with the scent of chalk dust and dried ink. Small wooden desks were arranged in neat rows facing a large blackboard at the front of the room. It was a scene of quiet learning, a place where the future of the village was being shaped. But that future had been erased, and the room was now a monument to a terrifying and silent event. On the desks lay open books and unfinished lessons. It appeared as though the children had been in the middle of their studies when they vanished. The investigators noted the eerie stillness of it all, a snapshot of a normal school day that had been violently and inexplicably cut short. A child's slate showed a half-finished arithmetic problem. A spilled inkwell had created a dark, permanent stain on the wooden floor, a small, chaotic mark in an otherwise orderly scene. The silence in that room was heavier than anywhere else in the village, filled with the ghosts of children's laughter and the patient voice of their teacher. It was on the blackboard that the investigators found the only written message in the entire village. Scrawled in neat, deliberate chalk letters was a simple, horrifying sentence in Portuguese. Now ha salvação. There is no salvation. The words hung in the air, a final, cryptic statement from a community on the brink of oblivion. Who wrote it? Was it the teacher, delivering one last terrible lesson to an empty room? Or was it one of the villagers, leaving a warning for whoever might come looking? The handwriting was steady, not the work of someone in a panic. It was calm, resigned and utterly hopeless. This message became the dark heart of the Verde mystery. It transformed the scene from one of simple abandonment to one of existential dread. Salvation from what? A plague? An attack? Or something far stranger? Something for which there was no earthly defense? The phrase offered no answers, only a profound sense of doom. It suggested that the people of Verde knew what was happening to them. They knew there was no escape. And with that knowledge, they stepped into the void, leaving behind only this chilling epitaph on a dusty blackboard. The discovery of the message, "There is no salvation," sent a shockwave through the investigation and the public consciousness. It was a single, solid clue in a case otherwise built on absences and speculation. But what did it mean? The phrase itself is deeply ambiguous, capable of holding many different interpretations, each more disturbing than the last. Was it a religious statement, a cry of spiritual despair from a deeply devout community facing a crisis of faith? Or was it a more literal warning, a declaration that no help was coming and that their fate was sealed by forces beyond their control? The message offered no context, no author, and no explanation. This lack of clarity allowed theories to multiply like weeds in the abandoned gardens of Verde. To some, the message was proof of a paranormal or supernatural event. They imagined a scenario straight out of a horror story. A malevolent entity, a cosmic force, or an alien intelligence descending upon the village. In this dark narrative, the villagers were not just killed or abducted, they were erased. There is no salvation becomes a statement of metaphysical truth, a recognition that they were facing something against which human struggles were utterly futile. It was a surrender to an incomprehensible and ultimate power. To others with a more grounded, if no less grim, perspective, the message pointed towards human actors. Perhaps it was a threat written by the very people responsible for the disappearance. It could have been the final taunting message left by a band of ruthless guerrillas or political extremists, a warning to the state and any who might oppose them. In this light, the words are not a cry of despair, but a declaration of power, a boast that their victims had no hope of rescue. It becomes a piece of psychological warfare, designed to terrorize and to ensure the story of Hoer Verde would be whispered in fear for generations. And then there is the most intimate and perhaps most tragic interpretation. What if the message was written by one of the villagers for the others? Imagine a leader, a priest or the school teacher, realizing that their community was doomed, perhaps by a sudden, incurable disease that moved with impossible speed, or by a collective madness that had taken hold. The message in this case is an act of grim acceptance. It is a final, sorrowful address to their own people, a way of saying that they must face their end together, for there was no hope of survival. The steady handwriting then becomes a sign not of calm, but of profound, heartbreaking resignation. So let's dive into Section 5, the guerrilla theory. In the politically turbulent landscape of the 1920s Brazil, the most plausible and widely circulated theory was that of a political massacre. The country was rife with dissent, with rebellions and guerrilla movements simmering in the remote, often lawless interior. Hoer Verde, isolated and far from the reach of the central government, would have been an easy target. Proponents of this theory argue that the village was wiped out by a revolutionary group. The motive could have been simple. The villagers may have refused to provide support, or perhaps they were suspected of being government informants. The disappearance was a brutal act of retribution and a warning to others. Supporters of this theory point to the rifle found propped against a wall. They suggest it was the possession of a villager who had intended to fight back, but was swiftly and silently overwhelmed. The mass disappearance, they argue, was a cover-up. The guerrillas, after executing the entire population, would have had to dispose of 600 bodies, a monumental task. The theory posits that they forced the villagers to march deep into the jungle before killing them, or perhaps disposed of the bodies in one of the region's many deep caves or fast-flowing rivers, leaving no trace behind. The empty village was left as a silent, terrifying monument to their ruthlessness. However, this theory, while logical on the surface, begins to crumble under scrutiny. A massacre of this scale would have been incredibly difficult to keep secret. Someone would have talked, a disillusioned guerrilla, a captured rebel, or a local who witnessed the movement of a large armed force. Yet, no such testimony has ever surfaced. Furthermore, the state of the village itself contradicts the idea of a violent takeover. There were no bullet holes, no signs of forced entry, no bloodstains. A battle or even a one-sided slaughter would have left scars on the town. Hoer Verde was pristine, untouched by violence. The theory also fails to adequately explain the most bizarre details. Why leave the money in the cash register? A guerrilla group would surely have looted the village for supplies and cash. Why leave the food on the tables? It suggests an interruption so sudden that people could not even finish their meals. And most importantly, how could a group of fighters, no matter how disciplined, manage to abduct or kill 600 people without a single person escaping or a single sign of a struggle being left behind? The gorilla theory provides a human motive, but it struggles to account for the almost supernatural neatness of the scene. Another compelling and deeply unsettling theory suggests that the residents of Hoer Verde were not victims of an external force, but of their own minds. This is the theory of mass hysteria or collective psychosis. In isolated communities, strange psychological phenomena can take hold, spreading like a contagion. A shared delusion fueled by religious fervor, superstition, or a charismatic leader could have convinced the entire population to act in a way that seems incomprehensible to outsiders. Perhaps they were led to believe that salvation or transcendence awaited them elsewhere. Imagine a charismatic preacher arriving in the isolated village, spinning tales of a promised land or an impending apocalypse. He could have convinced the villagers that to achieve salvation, they had to leave their material world behind and follow him on a spiritual journey. This would explain the lack of struggle and the abandonment of all their possessions. They were not fleeing in fear. They were walking towards what they believed was a better existence. The message, "There is no salvation," could have been a dissenting voice, written by the one person who saw the madness for what it was but was powerless to stop it. The journey in this scenario would have ended in tragedy. Led deep into the unforgiving jungle without adequate supplies, the entire community would have succumbed to starvation, disease, or the elements. Their leader, either a charlatan or a true believer, would have led them to their deaths. This theory accounts for the lack of bodies near the village itself. It also provides a chillingly plausible explanation for the collective orderly departure. The people of Hoer Verde were not taken. They walked away willingly, marching together into oblivion under the spell of a shared, fatal delusion. Yet, like the other theories, this one has its weaknesses. It requires the existence of a leader or a precipitating event for which there is absolutely no evidence. No records or surviving accounts from neighboring areas mention such a figure, or a sudden religious revival in Hoer Verde. Furthermore, for an entire community of 600 people, including the skeptical and the practical-minded, to unanimously fall under such a spell stretches the limits of credulity. There would surely have been some who resisted. The complete and total disappearance of every single man, woman, and child remains the biggest stumbling block for this psychological explanation. When logic and evidence fail to provide an answer, human imagination often turns to the extraordinary. The paranormal theory surrounding Hoer Verde is perhaps the most famous and the most chilling. It dismisses human actors and internal psychoses, suggesting instead that the villagers were victims of something not of this world. This theory posits that the disappearance was the result of an alien abduction or an encounter with a powerful otherworldly entity. In the vast, remote wilderness of Brazil, far from prying eyes, the village became the site of a silent, terrifying experiment or harvest. Proponents of this theory point to the sheer impossibility of the event. How could 600 people vanish without a trace, without a struggle, from a locked room mystery the size of a village? An advanced, non-human intelligence with technology beyond our comprehension is, for some, the only explanation that fits the facts. They imagine a silent craft descending from the sky, and a force that could dematerialize or transport the entire population in an instant. The untouched meals and peaceful state of the homes are not signs of a calm departure, but of an event so swift and overwhelming that the villagers had no time to react. The message on the blackboard, "There is no salvation," takes on a new, terrifying meaning in this context. It could be the final realization of a villager who understood what was happening. They were facing a power so absolute that prayer, resistance and hope were all meaningless. It was not a warning to others, but a statement of fact about their own immediate, inescapable fate. This theory, while lacking any concrete evidence, provides a narrative that, in its own strange way, accounts for all the bizarre details of the case in a way that the more grounded theories cannot. Of course, this explanation lies firmly in the realm of speculation and science fiction. It is a theory born of a lack of answers, a story we tell ourselves when faced with a void of information. There are no crashed ships, no strange artifacts, no credible eyewitness accounts of strange lights in the sky over Verde in 1923. But the story persists because it speaks to a deep-seated human fear of the unknown and our own vulnerability in a vast, mysterious universe. For some, the idea of a cosmic horror is more comforting than the idea of a human one, or the terrifying randomness of a collective madness. Over the century that has passed since the disappearance, Verde has transitioned from a real place into a legend. The physical village has been almost entirely swallowed by the jungle. The wooden homes have rotted and collapsed, the streets have become overgrown trails, and the blackboard with its terrible message has long since crumbled to dust. All that remains is the story. It is a story that has been told and retold, evolving with each telling, yet the core mystery remains as impenetrable today as it was in 1923. The silence of Verde has endured, outlasting all who sought to explain it. Treasure hunters, paranormal investigators, historians and journalists have all made the pilgrimage to the site. They have come with metal detectors, cameras and theories, hoping to be the one to finally solve the puzzle. They have found nothing. The jungle guards its secrets well. The place itself seems to resist investigation. Its heavy, oppressive atmosphere a deterrent to all but the most determined. Local people in the region, generations removed from the event, still speak of the place in hushed tones. They call it a cursed or haunted land, a place to be avoided, especially after dark. The official records of the case are sparse and inconclusive. They offer a dry, factual account of the discovery but provide no resolution. The case remains officially open but inactive, filed away in a dusty archive, a historical curiosity. The lack of a definitive answer has allowed the legend to flourish. It has become a cautionary tale, a piece of Brazilian folklore that speaks to the dangers of the unknown and the fragility of human existence. The story of Verde is a reminder that not every question has an answer, and some mysteries are destined to remain unsolved. The power of the Verde story lies in this very lack of resolution. It forces us to confront the limits of our understanding. Was it gorillas, madness, or something from the stars? The fact that we cannot know is what makes it so terrifying. The empty rooms, the uneaten food, the final hopeless message, these images are seared into the collective imagination. They represent a fundamental fear, the fear of disappearing, of being erased from the world without explanation, leaving behind only a silent, lingering question mark. What is the legacy of a people who vanished? For the 600 souls of Verde, their legacy is not in the children they might have raised or the community they might have built. Their legacy is the mystery itself. They are remembered not for how they lived, but for how they disappeared. They have become a permanent fixture in the landscape of the unexplained, their story a chilling testament to the fact that the world still holds deep and unsettling secrets. Their names are forgotten, their faces lost to time, but their collective absence has created a story that will likely never die. The tale serves as a stark reminder of our own vulnerability. We build our lives on foundations of routine and predictability. We go to school, we eat our meals, we trust that the sun will rise tomorrow. Verde rips that comfortable reality apart. It suggests that at any moment, for reasons we may never comprehend, it could all just stop. The entire fabric of a community, with all its hopes, dreams and daily struggles, could be wiped clean, leaving behind only a few strange and silent artifacts. It is a story that undermines our sense of safety and order in the universe. Today, the site of Verde is little more than a whisper in the jungle. But the story continues to haunt us. It challenges us to look at the quiet, remote corners of our world and wonder what secrets they hold. Every abandoned house or deserted street can evoke a faint echo of the Brazilian village. The story has become a modern myth, a piece of folklore that taps into our deepest anxieties about existence and annihilation. It is a perfect, unsolvable puzzle, and its power comes from the fact that any of the proposed solutions is, in its own way, as terrifying as the mystery itself. In the end, we are left where the first investigators were, standing at the edge of an inexplicable void. The fate of the 600 people of Hoer Verde remains a gaping hole in the historical record. They are suspended forever in that moment of interruption in 1923. Their town a silent memorial to an event that defies logic, reason and explanation. There is no salvation from the mystery. There is only the enduring, chilling silence and the echo of those final, chalk-written words left hanging in the empty air of a forgotten schoolroom.